Hi everyone, this is Rizwan here from Sustainable Factors. I'm a sustainability and enterprise risk transformation consultant. For further information, you can contact me on LinkedIn at Sustainable Factors. Please do subscribe to the YouTube channel. We've just gotten that started. And of course, you can get me on my website, sustainablefactors.com/Rizwan Malik. In this presentation, I'm going to highlight some of the challenges in applying the TCFD guidance. Please note, however, that this presentation is an extract from the wider TCFD Alignment Maturity Assessment presentation, which I will link in the box below. So what I've done now is I've laid out the 4 pillars here. And for the purpose of this presentation, I'll be drilling down into the governance pillar, and I won't really be talking about the other 3 pillars here. Because the initial part of this presentation is just supposed to be a contextual background that builds up into the maturity assessment. Okay, so as you can see here, the governance pillar starts with its first instruction. So you remember that from those techniques, it starts with an instruction, or should I say, a required outcome. Okay, in other words, they're telling you as a business to be in a position where you can disclose the organization's governance around climate-related risks and opportunities. The arrow then points down for you to offer 2 ways. A and B. They want you to offer 2 ways in which you can be in that position to disclose that required outcome. So again, not to digress here, but like for those of you who are not experienced in program management, any program or transformation, when you aim to achieve an outcome, you have to first produce at least one or many outputs. So please stay aligned with that terminology, outcome and outputs. And in this case, there are 2 outputs that you need to achieve in order to be able to make those disclosures about climate governance. So the first one here is a description of the board's oversight of climate-related risks and opportunities. And the second one is a description of the management's role in assessing and managing climate-related risks and opportunities. So the idea here is when you start to produce such descriptions, you'll be creating those outputs that will deliver the required outcome. Now, the constraint here is when you ask someone a question, their answer will likely be subjective. In other words, it will be dependent on how they have interpreted your inquiry. Okay, you can't just now tell people to think objectively unless you have a corresponding framework that enforces this objectivity. And yes, the TCFD do direct the organization to use measurement frameworks to then enforce that objectivity, but it's not always the case across the reporting landscape. So any influence of subjectivity in those information flows would mean that stakeholders like asset owners or asset managers, they're going to then have to rationalize the data and information into their own proprietary models and then gap fill those data points through engagement sessions with your board and management teams. So to go around this inevitable issue of subjectivity, the TCFD offer a series of probing questions. And these probing questions, they really help create some boundaries in terms of the type of information you need to source across the business. And as you then go about answering these probing questions and generating that description of the board's oversight or that output, which the TCFD require, you'll be answering them with some kind of guided structure behind you. So here we can see 11 questions, and some of them actually, in fact, I think many of them follow on from the previous question. As you can see, for example, in question 2 here, in question 3, they're directly related to each other, as we can see question 4 and 5 as well, and so on. So let's look at the second output in terms of describing the management's role in assessing and managing climate-related risks and opportunities. And once again, we see 11 questions here, some of which again are closely related. And again, when you go about your investigations to answer these questions, you will have a pathway, albeit with a subjective bias to some degree. You can't eradicate it totally at this stage, but you'll have a pathway to start populating your TCFD alignment disclosures. So take, for example, question 10 and 11 here, which says, how does information reach the management and how often is this information passed on to management? So basically, they're asking you about the current processes and capabilities and frequency of execution. But now we see, again, practical issues begin to emerge, or should I say practical issues in how to apply the questions and answers, how to make them useful. So let's look at the practical issues in some more detail here. Firstly, how do we ensure that the answers to those questions that you've just elicited across the organization, how do we ensure that they have some quality control around it? Meaning, after investigations, are you now producing information which is relevant, reliable, specific, and so forth? Okay. Secondly, how can you even begin to answer these questions if your organization hasn't established effective and dedicated climate governance? Right? And thirdly, and I guess the maturity assessment fits into the essence of this third issue, and that is, how do we even know whether the information you produce, in other words, the answers which you give, how do we know whether they are good or bad in terms of supporting enterprise value or linked into a risk or opportunity? I mean, quality control will, of course, ensure that the answers meet a certain prerequisite insofar as being clear, understandable, consistent, timely, and so on. But this doesn't really necessarily increase the confidence of an asset owner or asset manager just because you've said it very well. So when you answer question 10 and 11 from the previous slide, which asked you how information reaches management and the frequency of passing this information, you'll maybe talk about a process or capability that that question requires. So, for example, you might talk about a climate engine, or you make it sound good. So you say we've got this super duper climate engine that models physical climate risk exposures, where this model then passes through an AI transformational layer, or dynamically passes through an AI transformational layer that starts to learn the calculations, machine learning, throw it in there. It all sounds great, and I'm sure it is great. There are some fantastic capabilities out there in industry, right? But as an asset owner or an asset manager, they are more keen to understand the maturity in such processes, hence why you start to have those engagement sessions, right, where they can get more specific. For example, does your super duper climate engine trigger on an ad hoc basis? Or is it even repeatable if someone leaves the organization? I've seen these processes where these modeling engines are essentially just disaggregated spreadsheets hovering in the corner of someone's desktop. Okay, and we need to now know whether this climate engine is this something which has been defined in the organization as part of its official procedures, or is it part of an applications portfolio? And even so, if it is, that's also great. That's a certain level of maturity you've got now. But that doesn't then tell me whether this climate engine uses key performance measures, and whether it can be optimized, and whether you have some kind of protocol for continual improvement. So you can see these various degrees of maturity here. Because every business is in the habit of offering you the brightest part of a potential bad or volatile story, which in turn can have an impact on the confidence in both how you disclose and how your audience interpret your disclosures.